This is the new Space Black Macbook Pro. It's got the same battery life, a slightly brighter screen, the same ports, and mostly the same specs. So if you're thinking about getting one of these, there's really only three things to consider before you do: the colour, the power, and the price. But having tested this for the past couple of weeks now, there's also some small issues and results, which to be honest, really shocked me. So let's get into it. Starting off with the unboxing, what I've got here is the 14-inch M3 Pro in Space Black. I went for the 12-core CPU option and upgraded the memory to 36 gigabytes. As usual, I always go for the base level storage, as Apple's SSD prices are just insane. I usually put everything on external SSDs, which are way cheaper, and I'd highly recommend doing the same. So all of that together costs $2,600 or £2,700. Apart from the usual stuff, there are really only a couple of changes. The first is the slightly revised stickers, which now reflects the new Space Black colour, but the most obvious change is this new black MagSafe cable, but it comes with a white power brick. That seems a really strange choice from Apple, and I think it would have been much better if they'd have just kept it white. But anyway, then of course we have the new MacBook itself, which leads into our first big consideration: the colour. This is the all-new colour which Apple are calling Space Black, and as you can probably already see, it's definitely not true black. To be honest, it's more of a dark grey than black, but regardless, the colour is awesome. It's also noticeably darker than the space grey, and you can tell how areas like the keyboard blend in much better. I've heard a lot of people complaining about this colour, wanting it to be closer to pure black, but personally I wouldn't want a completely black laptop. I think what they've done here works really well. So if I bring in my space grey MacBook, you can see the difference in colour. I've also got an old silver MacBook Air here, so you can see all three colours in comparison. This isn't actually the first ever black MacBook we've had. In 2006, Apple released a black polycarbonate MacBook, and before this there were actually black PowerBook models as well. But this is the first aluminium model that they are calling black. And there's good reasons for that. The first is fingerprints and smudges. This became quite evident with Apple's midnight blue MacBook colour, which is notorious for showing marks and fingerprints. Apple is saying that won't happen with this one due to an entirely new anodization process, and so far that seems to be the case for me, with fingerprints only slightly more visible than on my space grey MacBook. The other issue though is scratches. Put simply, the further away an exterior finish is from its raw colour, in this case aluminium, then the more scratches are going to show. This is also one of the main reasons we haven't had a different colour in the Apple Watch Ultra yet. If you coat an exterior layer of metal with a different colour, then when things scratch, they're going to show up badly, and that's definitely something worth considering. Another consideration is whether this new colour will match up or clash with your desk setup. If you've got one of Apple's studio displays or the Pro Display XDR, then it's just not going to match. So if you are one of those people that wants things matching well visually on your desk, then this is definitely something to consider. Despite these niggles, this is probably my new favourite MacBook colour. It is, however, exclusive to the M3 Pro or Max models, and I really like that. Personally, if I'm paying a lot of money for a product, it's nice to have a little bit of scarcity to it, so you're not walking around with the same colour as everyone else, especially for the more powerful Pro models. Which brings us on to our next big consideration: power. It's no surprise that Apple's new M3 chip is fast, really fast. But then again, so is the M1, and the M2 for that matter. In fact, Apple claims it's up to 50% faster than the M1, but only around 15% faster than the M2. And once again, we have the 3-chip lineup from Apple: the M3, the M3 Pro, and the M3 Max. For years, I've been an advocate of maxing out CPU and memory in my laptops, because after a couple of years of use, they always seem to slow down in comparison with my usage. In other words, it's felt like we've been playing catch up on raw chip power for a while now, but Apple's M1 chip changed the game, and the only reason I have an M2 laptop versus an M1 is because I upgraded straight from an Intel, and at the time I went for the M2 Max, but I'm beginning to rethink whether that was needed. That's why I've got the M3 Pro here. I wanted to test a real world scenario, something I do all of the time, and compare the speed of the older M2 Max versus the new M3 Pro. Now before I start this, I wanted to show you my expectations going in. If we look at this performance review by Nano Reviews, you can see that the scores are quite similar, and if anything, the M3 Pro actually comes out on top if you believe the scores. In my test, both of the CPUs have 12 cores and a 16-core neural engine. The only big difference is the GPU, where my M2 Max has 38 cores versus the M3 Pro, which has almost half that at just 18 cores. There's also a difference in memory, with my M2 Max having 64GB versus the 32GB in the M3 Pro. I'm not expecting memory to make a difference fingerprints for this task, as nothing else will be running in the background, but the extra cores of the GPU should make a difference. They are also different sizes, with my older laptop being a 16-inch versus this newer being a 12-inch. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. What I've got here is a Premiere Pro video with multiple audio tracks and effects. It's actually my video on the Apple Watch Ultra 2, so if you haven't seen that yet, then get subscribed to the channel, hit the notification bell, and you won't miss another drop. I'm going to render this video in 4K. Let's click render. Okay, so on the right is the M3 Pro timer, and on the left is the M2 Max timer. What's interesting is they both start by estimating around 6 minutes, so this could actually be quite close. Actually, no, maybe not. The M2 Max is just churning through this a lot faster, already at 2 minutes and 52. I'm going to skip ahead now to when the M3 Pro is finished. Okay, so it's finally finished at just under 7 minutes. That's more than twice as slow. I'm genuinely really shocked by the difference there. I didn't think the extra GPUs would have that much of an impact on something like this. And I think the lesson here is beware of what the benchmark scores say. I wanted to see if I could get away with just ordering the Pro versus the Max the next time I upgrade, and it looks like I wouldn't want to do that unless I wanted to upgrade to the M3 Max, which I just can't see the point. Something else to consider as well is that people have been experiencing massive problems using Final Cut Pro with the new M3 chip, which is pretty bizarre. So if you do use Final Cut Pro for anything, then I'd recommend watching the Zone of Text video, which I'll link to below. Aside from this, you can now get 128GB of memory with the M3, as well as hardware accelerated ray tracing and mesh shading for the first time, which is only really relevant if you're using creative applications that use ray tracing for production rendering. Things like Blender or Cinema 4D, where the M3 family sees quite dramatic improvements. So with all of that in mind, where does that leave us? Well, for my main workflow, I've realised that an M2 Max is going to be twice as fast as an M3 Pro, and it's a good example of why not to underestimate the importance of GPU. Looking online, you can buy a 14-inch M2 Max brand new for around £2,600. That's £100 cheaper than the M3 Pro, and for twice the power. I know which one I would buy. So while the new M3 MacBooks are yet another step forward for Apple, just remember that now is the perfect time to pick up some incredible bargains out there. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Thanks again for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.